My name is Jessica, and I will be your host for today's webinar, Maintain Security of Critical SAP Applications in a Mobile Work Environment. Today I'm joined by Sean Donahue, Product Marketing Manager for Desktops and Apps at Citrix. In today's webinar, you'll learn how to strengthen security and compliance, accelerate and simplify your migration strategy, meet users' growing expectations for mobile work styles, and reduce costs of maintaining SAP applications with centralized management. Before I turn this over to our speaker, let me review a few housekeeping details. We will have a live Q&A session toward the end of today's event. You're welcome to submit your questions during the presentation using the Ask a Question window on your screen. Simply type your question into the Ask a Question window and click Submit. Also, we are recording this event, and the on-demand version will be available from the same link you used to join today. So feel free to come back and watch the archive and share it with your colleagues. And finally, the slides are available for download from your Event Resources tab. I will now hand it over to Sean to begin the presentation.
Great. Thank you, Jessica. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're listening to this on the Ethernet today, and welcome to the webinar. Today's broadcast, like Jessica said, is all about maintaining security of your critical SAP apps in a mobile work environment, and today's episode is a condensed episode for your viewing pleasure. My name is Sean Donahue. You can follow me on Twitter at SeanDo40. So today's webinar, we're going to focus on a bunch of key objectives. First, we're going to look at strengthening security and compliance in general, but again, in the lens of your critical applications that run your business. Some of those apps happen to be SAP. Some of those happen to be running on Citrix XenApp. So how do we strengthen that security and compliance? And we have audits coming up. What do we do about those? We're going to talk about accelerating and simplifying your migration strategy, because we'll look at some red flags today for compliance audits, and we'll find out what we need to do to avoid those red flags, overcome them, and migrate away from them. But how do we do that as fast and simply as possible? We're also going to look at the users. So we have users, they expect to be mobile, they expect to work on any device, they expect to work from anywhere. How do you meet those expectations as efficiently as possible, even while you're using SAP GUI, which they traditionally have been using on an on-prem manner? And then we're also going to look at how to reduce costs, centralized management. This feeds into also increasing security as well. When you centralize your data, centralize your applications, keep them in the confines of the corporate vault, which is the data center. Don't allow data, don't allow critical applications to reside permanently on an endpoint device that could be left in the seat back pocket of an airplane. Just avoid it. So, but first, before we get into it, like I said, I want to look at this through the lens of your most critical business applications. This is kind of a word from our sponsor type message. So we're talking about SAP, one of the most business critical applications that we run today, and SAP specifically on XenApp and XenDesktop. And if you're like tens of thousands of customers out there today, you may very well be running your SAP UIs on XenApp and XenDesktop. And you're doing that not just for the security, not just for the flexibility, and not just for the user experience, but you may be doing it because, hey, you know, it's been supported by SAP for 14 years, since 2001. And customers are using SAP with Receiver on any mobile device. Again, I want my users to break the tether that they have from the beige box that's been sitting under their desk. I want to be able to access SAP from any location I happen to be. Travel a lot, you shouldn't have that as a limitation. Any device, anywhere, Citrix Receiver is available for just about every device known to mankind, and you can access your SAP from those devices. And then, of course, we talked about security. So secure platform and endpoint devices available today. SAP is more than just travel and expense reports. SAP runs your most sensitive intellectual property from whatever industry you happen to be working in. keeping that sensitive intellectual property secure in the data center and keeping SAP, your SAP UI, secure in the data center alongside it, and virtualizing its experience out to the end user through receiver on any device in any location enhances that security, because again, the data, the apps don't reside on the endpoint device, which makes the endpoint devices disposable. You can actually lose them, get rid of them, get them stolen. It won't matter, because all your secured intellectual property, your data and your apps, your critical apps, are in the data center. But, and this is a big but, when we come down to it, when we talk about this and take this approach, we want to really hammer home the concept of this security and compliance. And I want to take a few moments to talk about this here today, what we mean when we say security and compliance, because we're coming up to that magical time of the year. It's going to be end of fiscal year for a lot of our organizations. If you go to your accounting department and your security and compliance department, find out when your fiscal year is going to end, and be sensitive to the fact that you may have an audit coming up. And almost every organization in the world is faced with audits. And an audit, of course, is when somebody comes in and does a full assessment of your accounting procedures and your financial procedures and your data security and sensitivity and all that stuff. And they always look at your IT infrastructure. Now, what we're going to talk about here are some of the audits that frequently come up. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them, even though I get into it because it's all about the accounting, it's all about the numbers. But some of the common compliance audits that you may be looking at is the Sarbanes Oxley Act. And this one is for all publicly traded companies. If you're available on the stock market, you are subjected to the SOX audit. Which really is about, how you protect information, how you protect data within your organization. It goes way beyond that, though. It actually talks about things like your governance boards and your board of directors and communication. It's a really in-depth audit. If you're in the healthcare industry, or if you've been to a doctor in recent years, you are well aware of the HIPPA Act, your Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. We all have to sign that little waiver about HIPAA. So HIPAA is crazy sensitive on how you secure access to applications and how you secure access to data. And we've all seen the headlines of a nurse or a doctor who lost, in Boston even, who lost medical records on one of the public transportation trains. Big problem for that healthcare organization. You have the GLBA, which is a Financial Modernization Act. You have your PCI DSS, which is your Payment Card Industry Data Security Standards, basically how you take credit cards or credit card payments or process payments even. So we look at industry-specific audits. You may know what audits you might be facing, your compliance audits that you might be facing. Oftentimes it's performed by an independent third party who will come in and check out your documentation. And because your IT infrastructure is such a critical part of how you secure data and financial information, IT infrastructure always subject to your compliance audits. And that's what I want to talk about here today. So I feel like I'm Paul Revere trotting on my pony through Lexington and Concord screaming, the auditors are coming, the auditors are coming. What happens when you have an audit and let's say you fail an audit? What happens at that point? Well, disruption to business with SAP. Again, we want to look at the subject through the lens of SAP running on top of XenApp. Disruption to your business with SAP if you actually fail the audit. And we're going to get into reasons why you would fail the audit, but one of the most common ones is you're running on unsupported platforms. I'm going to talk about something called Server 2003 in a minute, and that's a huge red flag for audits. So if you fail the audit because you're running on an unsupported version of, let's say, Windows Server, this could really disrupt your supply chain. Your inventory, your sales inventory, if you're in manufacturing, and this goes across the board, across verticals, but if you are in the auto industry, let's say, just as an example, you can't have your sales franchises check your inventory because of a failed compliance audit, and the ERM systems are not going to be able to hook into one another any longer. You're not going to be able to check the suppliers that you work with for those bumpers or for, you know, medical supplies, let's say. It can be a huge disruption to the business continuity and leave you at some significant risk. So what risk? Well, of course, you're going to lose revenue. If business as usual is going to be interrupted or has the potential to be interrupted, and there's the potential for lost revenue, lost sales, you name it. And even some of these audits that you are subject to come with their own fines. As if losing revenue is not bad enough, you could be fined up to $5 million for a failed Sarbanes Oxley audit. And this is crazy. If you fail your GLBA audit, you could actually face up to 5 years in prison. Not to mention, you're on the nightly news, and your public image could be tarnished. And public image is a very, very valuable thing. So, getting right into it, I talked to a few auditor friends of mine, and I asked them, I said, tell me, what are some of the biggest red flags that immediately trigger a concern for your auditing procedures? And this is what they told me: your disaster and recovery testing. Gone are the days, and this one goes hand in hand with your backup and restore testing. So how are you going to remain agile, and how are you going to maintain security in the face of disaster? And as we've seen, natural disasters could happen at any time and any place. It could be man-made disasters. You have to have some plan for your DR. And that could even be, in certain industries, you actually have to have a mirror facility. So a mirror facility that you can move your entire organization, your entire operation to in the event of a disaster. Backup or restore testing. It's not just good enough anymore to have an 8-tape backup cycle. You remember those days when we had tape backups and we'd have an 8-tape rotation? Those don't cut it anymore. You've got to have a proven backup and restore methodology in place. Licensing compliance, make sure you're using the proper licenses and you have the proper licensing in place. Using tools from certain software vendors can help you do that. Documented change management, if you're into ITIL or ITSM, if those acronyms do anything for you, then you're very familiar with a well-documented change management operation. And of course, the documentation goes hand in hand with change management. But the biggest one here, the biggest red flag, the immediate one that will trigger off that compliance auditor is the unsupported platforms. If you're running platforms like Windows Server that no longer receive support from Microsoft, then you are at a serious risk for your compliancy audit. And that leads me into the next part of this abbreviated webinar: is what are we talking about, and how do we get through this, and how do we increase that security and compliance? And of course, you may very well be familiar with the concept or the impact that Windows Server 2003 met its end of support already. That happened July 14th, 2015. If you're listening to my voice, it happened already. So we have met that goal. The problem is, what if I'm still running Windows Server 2003? What if I have some instances out there that I'm still running and I still have older versions of Citrix product? Maybe it's earlier versions of XenApp, maybe it's even Presentation Server. And what if I'm running SAP on top of that? And that's the exact perfect storm that I've been talking about. You're running your most mission-critical applications like Citrix and SAP on top of a platform that Microsoft doesn't support anymore. What's the implication of that? And basically what Microsoft is saying is you're not going to get any updates for Windows Server 2003 anymore. This is no service packs, no hot fixes, no security patches, nothing. They don't support it. It's not just you can't call into the help desk. It's you don't get these critical patches, which means if there is a zero-day attack, if there is a black hat type attack on Server 2003, then you are vulnerable, and Microsoft will not release any remediation for that. We saw it happen with Windows XP when it met its end of support, and it wasn't even a week after that ended support that there was a exploitation in the operating system that left all those people still vulnerable. It also means that there's no compliance. Will not pass your compliance audit. We just talked about compliance audits and the effect. We just talked about the PCI. That's the credit card payment one. Means you won't be able to access Visa or MasterCard. But it goes beyond that, of course. It goes into all the other compliancy audits, the Sarbanes Oxley, you name it. It means that there's no safe haven. Physical, virtual servers, small business server, all are subject to this end of support. No matter what flavor or what variety of Server 2003 you're running, it's all going to meet the same thing. So now is the time to act today. Now, in talking to customers over the past several years about the subject, I've come to the conclusion that there are several reasons that people are taking their time in tackling their upgrades. And the most popular one, the most common one, is the applications. That Server 2003 box sitting in that data center has applications on it that we just have a gut instinct are not compatible with Server 2012 or whatever your data center modernization destination happens to be. It's a gut feeling, though. I know that they're incompatible with 2012, people say. I know that they're incompatible with the new versions of Internet Explorer. I know that they're incompatible with new flavors of XenApp or app virtualization from Microsoft, and that's the concern. But I don't have any empirical evidence to that. I just have a gut instinct. And that's when I encourage them, you know, hey, listen, why don't we look at something like AppDNA? Of course, it's a Citrix product. You know, it's a great product, but I'm not going to stand here and sell it to you because the usage for AppDNA in a model like this is so perfect. What you're looking at is a accelerated time to app migration. You actually, instead of testing each application individually against your target operating system, you simply point AppDNA, the AppDNA client, to your application library. Maybe it's an MSI file, maybe it's an EXE file. Doesn't matter. I can evaluate them all. I can assess them all. And I'm going to assess these applications, including SAP, against your target technological platform. This could be Server 2008, Server 2012. This could be a client side. This could be Windows 7. This could be Windows 10. And what we do is we read the DNA of the application. That's marketing genius, isn't it? It's called AppDNA. It reads the DNA of the application. And we compare it against known limitations. And the reports you get back will tell you clearly the effort required to upgrade that application. If it's green, it's good to go against your target OS. Let's say it's Server 2012. If it's amber or yellow, then there might be a shim that we can put into the app to fix the app, and we actually have that automated process. If it's red, well, all right, we've got some serious limitation with that application and whatever your destination you're testing it against. You might have to go back to the vendor, you might have to go back to the developer and have them actually update that application for you. So again, point AppDNA to your application library. That's all your applications now, and it includes your SAP apps too, and test them against your target technology. 90% is what some customers are seeing as far as an accelerated migration strategy. Again, that's compared to the manual individual app testing that we used to do. And then once we have that migration, that app migration strategy in place, now we start looking at that Server 2003, and now we start saying, okay, let's face it, when we deployed that thing, it was, you know, x86 was the platform. It was a single core. We didn't have power and capacity management. We used hard drives and not SSDs. And, you know, clouds were cumulus. A lot has changed since then. And if we pull our vision up and we start looking at things like Server 2012 as the destination, and we start looking and saying, okay, Instead of running this on the, the old flavors of presentation server, I want to look at XenApp. I want to look at XenApp 7.6. I want to look at the latest one and see how much has evolved since I plugged that server in my data center corner 12 plus years ago. And so much has evolved since then. We mentioned earlier at the front of this presentation that the users are really have evolved amazing strides since 2003 was introduced. We're not tethered to the beige box. We're not even tethered to Windows anymore as an endpoint device. We use a variety of devices throughout the course of your day. If you're like me, you wake up. Well, I hope everybody wakes up. But if you're like me, you wake up, you reach over immediately, and I grab my phone. And I haven't even said hello to my wife or good morning to my wife yet. I grab my phone, and I check my email, and I start being productive on my Android device. Over breakfast, I grab my Windows Surface, and I start being productive, and I start, using work line of business applications. And I transition throughout the day, and I start accessing my MacBook Air. And I'm continuing that consistent, rich user experience, but I'm on any device, and I'm going to cafes, and I'm going to restaurants, and don't tell my manager this, but I'm working outside the office almost the entire day. I expect that to happen. I expect to be able to access SAP applications from any of my devices that I choose. And Citrix Receiver with XenApp on the back end and SAP hosted in a virtual XenApp environment allows that experience to continue. And it doesn't require the app or data to be installed on the endpoint. It screen scrapes it over the HDX protocol, giving me that amazing experience with security and with flexibility. But also, what we're looking at is enabling more use cases and maximize your 2012 investments. If you're not aware of it, I want to encourage you to look it up. We won't have time to talk about it here today. But look up something called the XenApp Connector for System Center Configuration Manager. This is what allows you. Citrix isn't going to go into an environment and say, hey, we've got to rip out your existing infrastructure and put in this big, heavy back-end infrastructure to support XenApp 7.6. No, maximize your existing investments already. If you use Microsoft's suite of products from System Center, we have connectors into SCCM, SCOM, or SCOM. We have SCVMM. We have AppV. So we have a tight integration with all the investments that you're likely to be using already, allowing you to publish apps from System Center Config Manager right to your XenApp server. This I love. If you're checking Facebook, do me a favor, come back to my screen and check this out. Context-aware, secure remote access. We've been talking about security, we've been talking about remote access, we've been talking about the anywhere, any device. And you may say to me, but Sean, I don't like the idea that my users are able to access sensitive data out in the wild. Well, okay, first off, the data is not on their device, okay, but you still don't want them to access it? That's fine. Context-aware security. If they roam outside the secure geofence of your corporate building, you can degrade the application access that they have. You could dim out clipboard. You could take access to the app away entirely. Enhanced security even when they're out in the wild. And we've already talked about what happens if a user loses a device. But now, bringing it back full circle again, we want to talk about simplified management and support. And within XenApp 7.6, it's the new director, allowing you deep insight into each user session, allowing you to control user sessions and actually get deep protocol performance inspection of each session with multi-site user support, detailed analytics. But to bring it back even more full circle, when we talked at the beginning about compliance and auditing within Director, boom, we've got the Smart Auditor Session Recording, which allows you to actually capture screen updates to a video file, actually configure and monitor specific users, quick replay, quick troubleshoot. You have this screen auditing session recording on file so that if you get audited, you can actually say, let's go look at the tape. You yourself can be an NFL referee, an NFL ref, and you can go look at the playback of what the session recording was doing during your audits. Put yourself under the hood, if you're an NFL fan. All right, finally, rolling it all up into one, 7.6, some of the new features, some of the new benefits that you're going to experience: faster application access through pre-session caching, GPU accelerated video. I could do an entire webinar on this and how you can actually get graphic intense applications to any device in any location, but they're running on XenApp in the data center with the data secured next to them. The HTML5 browser, anonymous access, but here, when we talk about security and compliance, FIPS compliance and common criteria, as well as throttling back that clipboard. If you go to citrix.com/XenApp, you'll get the full feature-rich update for 7.6 of what I didn't have time to cover here. I see questions flying into the Q&A panel, so I want to make sure that we have time to get to that and meet the condensed time that we had. But I did want to pay homage to SAP's new advancements and how they are actually supported on Citrix XenApp already today. If you're looking at any type of a 3D graphics modeling application, SAP 3D Enterprise Pro is the example I'm using here. Team that up with the NVIDIA Grid boards, and the Citrix XenApp vGPU support, and boom, you get rich graphic experience, rich graphic user experience on a tablet device, on a Chromebook device, on any device without investing $5,000 into a dedicated GPU heavy laptop or desktop. So that's food for thought, something to look into in the future. And at the end, just some suggestions. Read more about auditing. There's a great article on TechTarget. Citrix partners are very learned on AppDNA, so if you haven't used AppDNA yet, connect with citrix.com/partners to find an SA who can help you out with that. And of course, Zen Desktop has a free trial that you can get your hands on if you're not a Citrix customer already. And Jessica, with that, breathing, panting hard from this accelerated webinar format, I saw some questions come in. Can we take some Q&A from our live audio audience? Jessica.
Of course. Thank you very much, Sean. And as a reminder to everyone in the audience, if you have a question, you can submit them in the Ask a Question area on your screen. Just type your question into the text box and click Submit. All right, our first question is, I have Windows Server 2003, but it isn't connected to the internet. Am I still at risk?
Great question. I've actually heard this from a few customers as well. Yeah, I've got 2003. It's in the data center. It's being used for, one legacy application. It's not connected to the internet, et cetera, et cetera. But it's still a red flag for audits, and it's still a red flag for compliancy. So yes, you do have to worry, because even if you're not vulnerable to zero-day attacks, which you very well still could be, because that server is still connected to your network, and your network is an open door for vulnerabilities. But it's still, you're at risk for failing your audit. So please do me a favor and really tackle that 2003 device and get that swapped out.
Thank you very much. And another attendee has asked, we've been running SAP GUI for years and is still chugging along. I don't see the need to upgrade.
Okay, well, I'm not here to sell you SAP, so I'm not going to try to convince you on that. However, look at all the new features and functionalities that SAP is enabling for you. And people tend to look at their older versions of SAP GUI and tend to look at them as just, well, that's where I go to do my expense reports. And I got to be honest with you, your users are becoming much more savvy. And if you start putting application UIs in front of them that are 10, 12 years old, their expectations are really diminished, and their viewpoint and perception of the corporate IT could be diminished as well. So users have expectations for modernized UIs, and I'd suggest really providing that to them with an updated SAP, updated line of business apps, you name it.
Thanks, Sean. And someone else is asking, will SAP run on Windows 10?
Okay, great question. Love it. We have a couple of things here. First off, I don't work for SAP, so I can't proclaim supportability statements on their behalf. But what I will say is this. I've updated my devices to Windows 10. I love it. I want to run my SAP. I want to run my line of business apps on Windows 10 before corporate IT is ready to support them on Windows 10. So what do? I downloaded the Citrix receiver for Windows 10 the day I upgraded to Windows 10, and now I launch receiver and I launch a corporate supported version of SAP running on the back end on Zen app. I launch a corporate supported version of a Windows 7 desktop running on the back end on Zen desktop. I still have Windows 10 on my endpoint, but corporate IT is still taking a pragmatic approach to upgrading their apps and their desktops to Windows 10, yet business continuity is maintained. And if you want more definitive answers to that, hey, access AppDNA and run the tests for Windows 10, and you'll get your color-coded answer right there. Jessica, I know our back's against the wall for time here. Can I squeeze in one more question?
Yes, you can. Our last question is, how do I get that AppDNA tool you mentioned?
Okay, great question. AppDNA is available in a couple of ways. AppDNA, you may very well already have it. If you're a Citrix customer and you've got platinum editions of Zen App, Zen Desktop, hey, you already got AppDNA. If you're not using it, get using it because it's already yours. You could get in touch with a Citrix Solutions Advisor. This is the Delta Force team of Citrix partners that we have around the world, and they all have access to AppDNA that they can use on projects in your organization for free until July 29, 2016. Or, of course, go to citrix.com/appdna, and you'll get the landing page with all the detail. Jessica, I know we're out of time, and we got to end this webinar. I just want to express my appreciation to everybody who listened in, and thanks, and come back again for the next episode. Jessica, off to you.
Thank you very much, Sean, and that does bring us to the end of today's session. So thank you again, Sean, for an informative presentation. And a special thank you to everyone in the audience for being with us today. We look forward to seeing you soon at future events. Thanks again for joining us, and have a great day.
Bye-bye, everyone. Cheers.